Okay, so when I left this, I was talking about bringing up Kali and Metasploitable. I've since brought up my infrastructure server and I put it in a VMware LAN segment to sandbox and air gap it. I've also put my Debian 9 client in that same space, and I've proven that A, my infrastructure server is successfully giving out DHCP leases, B, that my client has received one, so that if I wanted to, I could take Kali and Metasploitable, because Metasploitable is so vulnerable, and flip it over into the sandbox. What I did, the first thing I did, of course, on my infrastructure server is make sure that DHCP is healthy. In the real world, particularly when you're talking about things like um, disaster response, business continuity, that sort of thing, when you're thinking about a full-scale enterprise network, one of the things you have to think about is the order in which you bring things back up again, particularly after a major outage or disaster or whatnot. Always, always, always bring up the core of your network first, make sure it's healthy, then bring up your clients. In this particular case, because my hypervisor is playing the role of both, for my NATed clients, it's both the switch and the router. For my LAN segmented clients, it's the switch and there is no router. I'm going to make sure that they're all in the right LAN segment. So the first thing I did, scrolling up just a trifle, I did sudo sudo service iscdhcp server status to check the status of this server, and I got this. It says I can't open the DHCP conf, v6 conf. So I looked at my etcdhcp directory, and there isn't one. I renamed the default config to dhcp v6 config.bak to make sure that, as I said in the previous video, you never put yourself into a corner. You never, or hardly ever, nuke the raw version of a file, the raw image of a drive. Always keep a copy of whatever it is that you're doing. So I realized that I was in the process of making DHCP v6 just go away. There's a simpler way to do this. Because nuking that config file is only half the concept. There's another directory called etc default right here. And inside that there are some default configurations for a number of different services. One of these is there's a file for ISC DHCP server, which I scroll down. It looks like this. What I did was I put a comment character in front of interfaces v6. So now all my DHCP server is going to try to do is vfloor. I also put the name of my network interface, ENS33, which seems to be the default for all Debian-based systems, in this file. Now, you would have added a file like this to your DHCP config file as well. It doesn't hurt to have it in both places. So I stopped the service, and then I started the service again, and as you can see, my IP address is static, and it is working, and my client now has. Now, one thing you need to be careful of when you're doing something like this, and let me show you my performance monitor. I am not going to run more than these 4 VMs that you see with green arrows by them. I can see that my memory is at about 11.5 gigs out of my 16 committed. Technically speaking, there's room, but notice the other thing. Look at what my disk is doing. I'm at 100% utilization on my disk. That doesn't mean my disk is full. That means the system is busy reading from and writing to these disks, because the hypervisor is maintaining the memory state of 4 VMs simultaneously. That's a whole lot of stuff coming in and off. That's a whole lot of read-write operations off the hard drive. This would be a little bit better if maybe I had a SSD, but not appreciably. So this is the limit of what I want to do. So what I can do now is I can go over to Kali and I can flip it. Like I said, this is going to take a minute. Flip it from NAT into my LAN segment. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing with Metasploitable. What I might actually do with Metasploitable, because it's kind of disposable anyway, is just reboot it. And I'm going to wait for it to come back. Now, Metasploitable will be a little harder to see. As you can see down in the bar, I've got my Kali, I've got my Debian, I've got my infrastructure server. Metasploitable is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to bounce this interface. So sudo, actually do groups. Am I in the sudo group? And am I not in the sudo group? So I may not be able to bounce this interface. Let's see. Cat. Let's see. There's a couple things you can do. Now, the sudoers file may not even be, okay, no. Okay, so, okay, what I'm going to do is actually reboot this VM entirely. If you had the ability to bounce a specific interface, you could do IP link set down, link set up, and it would obtain a new DHCP lease. So I'm going to have to do this the hard way. So I'm going to go up here and actually, the thing to note here, one of the things to remember here is that if you want to send this thing, a VM, the three-finger salute, that is Control-Alt-Delete, you have to use the key. So it's going to reboot it, because otherwise, if you Control-Alt-Delete, the host OS will intercept that. So I'm going to pause this for just a minute. Okay, so while we are rebooting Metasploitable, I checked in on my Kali system. I did IP address show, and apparently I got a lease from my DHCP server. So if I were to go over to look at my DHCP bindings on the server, I would see it. See, it changed. This was the IP address show I did before, and then I nmapped my target. I sent it the SV flag because I want to scan for versions. I want to see what version of these I am running. Now, this OpenSSH server is running protocol version 2. So some of the vulnerabilities that you would find for SSH version 1 are not there. So in some of these cases, you have to look at both the version of the server and the version of the protocol. So protocol 2 version, SSH version 2 is more secure than version 1. But that doesn't preclude SSH version, there from being vulnerabilities that you can't use. You could still use vulnerabilities that exist in the server version. And I see postfix, I see telnet, which is a terrible idea, honestly. I see the Apache daemon, I see Samba, I see a remote login, and another FTP server, and a couple of SQL things, and VNC, which is remote control GUI application, and Apache Tomcat. It looks like Java, something Java related. IRC. IRC is used by some botnets as a command and control channel. So IRC, now it is also used as the name would suggest, as a chat program. The good guys also use IRC just to talk to each other, talk about the projects they're building, the work they're doing, etc. So just because you see IRC open doesn't mean that someone is up to no good. It just means that there is a potential for vulnerabilities here. it looks like this is actually running an IRC server. So if I knew how, I could take that IRC port, shove something through it, and potentially push from the IRC port into something else. I also see NFS, so there's a lot here. And I'll pause this again, and we're back at Metasploit. User and password are both MSF. So I've got, and it is okay. Metasploit is not in the LAN segment. Interesting. Yeah. It's actually got two adapters here. I'm going to put it in the LAN segment. Okay. I should have checked that first, because now I have to reboot it again. As you can see, it's bringing the Apache server down. It's bringing the Tomcat servlet down. It's bringing NFS down, postfix, the Exinit daemon, all of it. We'll see what use we can make of some of these things a little bit later. And we're back yet again. And I may have mistyped that. Yep, I did. Let's see if StartX works. Nope. Okay. Server is already active for display 0. Interesting. Now what I'm doing, you can't see it, is jumping it over to different TTYs. The funny thing is, this is not telling me about my TTYs. Okay, so I may have a GUI, I may not. So IP address show. So I'm 1.12 now. So I could Control Alt to take control of my keyboard again. I could do Nmap one more time. Now, we're going to be working with Nmap in this module. The way we've used it before, just as kind of a sanity check on services we're currently building for ourselves, you can do that without root or pseudo privilege. Some of the more powerful things you can do with Nmap, you have to have pseudo privilege. So as you're writing these, pay attention to what you're doing. So actually, let me try to do. Okay, I'm going to pause this because this scan will take a minute. Okay, so now I have the rudiments of a network that I can play around with. Metasploitable is up and sandboxed. Kali is up and sandboxed and capable of nmapping this system. Now let me try that nmap one more time without pseudo privilege. I think -SV is the sort of thing that will work. Yep, it'll work. Now if you try to do things like TCP, SYN scanning, things like that, you may have to have root privilege for that. Now, one fun thing you can do if you forget yourself and just type the command without typing sudo in front, rather than using your command recall and then scrolling, using your arrow key to get back to the beginning, you could do sudo bang bang. That will recall the previous command and run it as root. If you haven't used sudo in a while, you have to re-authenticate as an approved sudo user, but it will work. So that's nmap, and this is probably this is something I can you can do a lot with this. Just learning the skills. There's no better way to learn what we want to learn than trying it yourself.